I'm just going to talk about myself.
Hi.
So I had the fortune of sitting with the book for a long time. I have the PDF in my email. If you would like it, I would sell it for $500. I will give $300 back to Sapagita Press, and I'll keep $100. And give another $100 to Christian. Anyways, so I was, really struggling. I think because of the abundance in the book, right? And so it was such a challenge to try to encapsulate and honor the book in the way that it needed to be honored. So I sat patiently was trying to extend grace to myself, especially at this time. I would email Chris or text Chris, email Kiana and Maria and be like, it's coming, I swear it's coming, here's a paragraph. And then like a month would go by, like, I swear it's gonna happen. Wait, I was in the emergency room, my back hurts, hold on. And then I was like, hey, Chris, look at my setup in my kitchen. And my back, I messed up my back, and so I had like a makeshift standing desk. I was like, this forward is happening, right?
Hello. Oh.
Yeah. And so I think that there's a life of the book, in any book, that we are so fortunate enough to encounter in our own lifetimes, right? But there's such a lived experience of the book, and I remember in an early like part of where Chris was reflecting on the book with on a thread, a digital solid thread that Maria is on and Rachel is on. She said, "Oh, I just saw this tweet about like." This, I think it was like a white author talking about how like first books or often books are like first poetry books are like memoirs, right? And you're freaking out a little bit, right? And which sort of signaled to me that you were still in a moment of learning, right? As we always are in a moment of learning. And I think, I've been reflecting on that, and I think the piece that Maria read from the foreword, reflecting on all of the parts of you that we are so fortunate to encounter in the book, right? That is not, you don't encounter a queer feminist, martial arts practitioner, abolitionist, youth mentor in a white person's first poetry book. I'm sorry, you don't. Right? And so it is fundamentally different. It's fundamentally different what you're able to do in this book. And so I maybe want to ask a little bit about how sort of, how you felt about like carrying your lived experience into language, right? In all the experiences, because you have like the tayo and the kami in every single poem is different, right? It shifts quite a bit. It's watery in that way, right? Is one way that I've been reflecting on it. But maybe just talk a little bit about like composing the book, how like Sapagita Press felt like the right place to go, and just reflecting on that.
So, Jason, like many of the people who read tonight, and like my Sapagita Press team, I only knew on the internet for so long. We met like literally in a Twitter thread during like when it was like lockdown. And I just remember like responding to a tweet of Jason's. I was like, he was, describing one of his many writing project ideas. I love you so much, but damn.
Gemini season, happy Gemini season.
And he was like, who wants to be part of this? And then I remember I was like very tentatively like, I'm not a published poet, but I've been performing poetry for a long time and this was really cool and I want to be part of it maybe one day. And so it's just wild to be your friend now, to be someone that I like think of as a mentor. We did a panel together at like the largest writers conference in America a few months ago. And in 2020 I was like, I don't know if I'll ever publish a book. And I got a call from Kiana, who's not here today, while I was in line to take a COVID test. Wow, it was so dystopian, man. It was like a Petco that they converted into a COVID testing site. I was like, what the fuck is this? And then I get a call from Kiana being like, hey, we want to publish your first book of poetry if you'll have us. And I was like, yes, but can I call you back because I'm about to put a nose swab, you know? And I said to Maria, I was like, or said to Kiana, I was like, Kiana, I don't have a manuscript, but I have a lot of poems. I guess I'll just figure it out. And I was like texting Hari and texting like other friends of mine who are poets who've been doing this longer than I have. And I was like, how do you put together a manuscript? And I remember Hari said, just get all the poems that you like and put them in one Google Doc and then just see what happens. Which honestly was great advice. So I like started looking for the poems that I was like proud enough to think of like, okay, this is gonna live in a book that someone will like own and it's like there forever. You know, it's not like when I perform and then the performance is good and then maybe you take some video clips, you know, but it's like, it's not something that lives the way a book does. And then like just as I was collecting poems, I was like, oh shit, like there are themes in my work and there's like, there is like a consistent voice here, and that's kind of what made me think of like, okay, what is tying all these poems together? What's the title that we're going for? And then, so about 2/3 of the book was stuff that I had already written that I just revised. And then the other third of it were new poems that I ended up writing because like going that process of revising all my old stuff, I was like, I'm gonna write new shit. And I felt like I needed to fill in a little like gaps between poems. And so that's how the book became the book.
I'll just sort of ask a follow-up and then we'll open it up for a little bit of conversation with you all. I think, you know, again, just sort of thinking about all of the experiences and sort of all the raw material of your lived experience in building and sustaining Luya, right? Developing relationships with us through Digital Sala, with all these different communities. But also organizing, being on the streets, especially during those the summer 2020 uprisings, and really sort of thinking through that, thinking through sort of what the anti-terror law brought to our families and our people back home in the Philippines, right? And so I'm curious as to like how does like writing a book or written poetry figure into all that, right? Because you perform, you teach poetry, right? And so how does the book, what's the significance of the book in that sort of, I guess, life practice, if that makes sense? Yeah.
You know, I said earlier, right, I was like, I'm gonna have a book by the time I'm 30. And I thought it would be a very different book, and I think the book was also like written during my Saturn return, right? So like so many things were happening, not just in the world, but like in my life. And I was, you know, spiraling, losing it, etc. And I feel like the book was my challenge of like, because I had editors and a contract and a deadline, and San Paquita Press was so generous all the time. But without that structure, I think I would have found it really hard to make space for myself to write something, right? Because like, yes, this book is so much about community and about the people in my life and the things that we've been through together, right? But it's also like, they're my poems. You know, that's my writing then that I put together in this book, and I want to celebrate with people. And it felt, especially at the start, like the first like round of edits we did, I was like, I'm really doing this? Like, it just felt like, yeah, it felt like I'd never made space for myself to be like, instead of being like a teacher of poetry or like, yes, I perform at things, to just be like, no, I am a poet, I am a writer, I am an artist, and this book is a work of art. Yeah.
And it's a book, like a full book.
Yes. It is my first full collection of poetry. I thought I was writing a chapbook, and then in the group chat, they were like, wait, your book is how long? It has how many poems?
Like, that shit ain't no chapbook.
Rachel was like, that's a debut collection of poetry, and you need to say that with your chest in all the marketing, so thank you.
Yeah.
This is why like knowing people who have done this shit before is important. I had no idea.
Please buy the book. But I know we're a little bit limited on time, but for any folks who want to share comments or reflections, questions for Christian, just being part of the conversation, yeah.
I like fun questions too. Like, these questions don't have to be serious, yo. You know. Maybe ask me at Thunderbolt later. I'll see if I feel like giving out my number then. Yeah. Yes, Kim?
What are your favorite subject matters to write about?
What are my favorite things to write about? Oh my gosh. Well, I wrote about a lot of things in this book, but like right now, what I've been writing a lot about like, or wanting to write a lot about this idea of like monstrosity and femininity. So I'm like thinking a lot about like gender and queerness and like queer love and the way that like queerness has allowed for so many different forms of love to be in my life and to like take romantic love off a pedestal. So that's what I'm really thinking about a lot now, and I want to write a lot about that. Yes, Swagapino Studies in the back. If you're on Twitter, that's Swagapino Studies. That's him.
Yo, tell us about your Saturn return, because like we're the same age.
Okay, the TLDR of my Saturn return was at the beginning of it, I was still talking to my dad on a regular basis, and now my bio is like Christian Aldana, poet, estranged from her father. I mean, I'm like making a joke out of it. It was sad. It was a lot. But I feel like the big thing that like my Saturn return taught, I also had like a huge career switch. It took me so long to leave my full-time community organizing job because I was just like, this is who I am, I'm an organizer, and if it's not my job title, then like, who am I? And I was like, I'm gonna spend all my free time organizing anyway if I leave this job, so like, what am I worrying about? But I think with the help of my very awesome therapist, shout out Pio, really helped me just be like, there is so much life I have not lived yet, and I feel like I was so attached to certain things that like anchored my life when I'm like, I've barely lived it, and I feel like I learned a lot about just like not holding things so tightly, and just being like, sometimes things happen that we don't like or don't expect, but like life will go on. And I think like my Saturn return was really reminding me, like I have such a good support system. I have my chosen family, like anything can be faced with those things being present in my life. Okay, last question, Sandra.
Was there a moment in your childhood where you really felt connected to your work as a community organizer? Or
In my childhood?
yeah, like I'm imagining like baby you.
Baby me?
What must have you been like? to
Baby Chris. Oh man, Baby Chris was a ham, If there was a spotlight, she was gonna be in it. You want her to perform, she'll do it. Like there is a video somewhere of me in like a Barbie brand wedding costume. And I'm lip syncing the words to Barbie Girl by Aqua with like my own choreographed dance moves. And I feel like I'm like, you know what, that's cringe, but Barbie is coming out, so maybe. But yeah, I was just like, so I'm the typical eldest daughter of an immigrant family type of stuff, so I'm 10 years older than my little sister, I'm 8 years older than my little brother, but so for a long time, I was just an only child. And like everyone I hung out with was like a senior citizen because my grandparents raised me. They would just like take me everywhere. Like I didn't have any little friends. I was just with my Lola and her buddies. So yeah, that's what I was like. I feel like I just have always been in like intergenerational space, I guess. And like I was always having to learn about what someone else was going through and doing, like just like how you do as like an ate, as a sister. Right, you're like, what are their needs? I like felt protective over them. Yeah, and then like, I grew up a little bit and I had all these idealized things about the world, and then I moved to Columbus, Ohio, and I was like, oh, America is not at all shout out to my college friends who are here. But yeah, I was like, oh, America is not at all what it is in movies and TV shows. And then I got radicalized pretty quick. Yeah, so that's what I was like as a kid.
I'm gonna ask just one more thing. Chris is an educator and an organizer. She's facilitating her own Q&A, which is like fantastic. I don't gotta do nothing. But I had to ask you this question.
Okay.
It is a book. It's here.
Yes.
It's here. You read a little bit of the foreword or the trigger warning, the note to the readers. What do you see for it? What do you? I know that like as you were planning the tour and wanting to come here and build with the right people, build the communities. You just came from the Bay last week. It's going to go off in Chicago this summer for sure. What is it that I don't know? What do you want for the book?
So my joking answer, because someone also asked me this question, I was like, I want some kid to go home like pissed off, like I have to study this fucking book of poems at school and I don't get it. But I'm like, I've made it. But then someone was like, so the institution, Chris? And I was like, okay, not that. But the deeper answer that as a Scorpio I did not want to give at the time is, you know, there's a lot of powerful Scorpios in this room right now. I just want to acknowledge that. I see you. But it is that I'm like, the same way that I pulled books off shelves, not expecting to find Filipino stuff in there or things I related to. I want somebody like me, you know, some queer Filipinx person somewhere or Asian person somewhere. It's like pick this up off a shelf and maybe be like, just spark the things that they've already been thinking about. You know, I think like if I had read a book like that when I was a teenager, you know, I would have had the political views I have now so much earlier. Probably would have figured out that I was gay so much earlier, you know, and like that's what I hope for the book. I hope the people who are supposed to read it, you know. I really don't care if we never sell this book outside of the general Asian diaspora or even Filipino community, right? Because like that's who I wrote it for. I wrote it for me, I wrote it for my friends. I want my, like, you know, similar, like Lady Gaga said something like she wanted to make pop music that her rock friends would listen to. And I feel like I wanted to write a book of poetry that my friends who don't write anything would want to read.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Maria up here to close us out.
Today, I want to say thank you again, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Filipino Workers Center. Thank you, Sunday Jump. Thank you, DJ That Fly Pinay. Thank you, Hi-Fi Kitchen. They've already packed up. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. If you would like, there is a reservation at Thunderbolt LA. That is where I will be. They have the Filipino-owned. They have drinks, food, etc. What's the book tour? Oh, this is part of my book tour.
Good job.
I was in the Bay last week. I'm in LA today. I'll be in Chicago all of June. There's New York sometime in July. Phoenix sometime in August. Berkeley in September. Hawaii maybe at the end of the year or next year. So yeah, follow Sampaguita Press. You can follow along with the tour. You can come to a tour stop if you want to, I guess. Yeah, but I don't expect that. Yeah, and I just like to invite up Steph and Eddie back to the stage to just. Is there anything that you need to tell people to do or?
Yep.
Yes. Yes, we're gonna close out with an age-old Filipino organizer tradition. Age-old, it's not that old.
Yes,
but
not that old. Alright, so everyone can please rise. Please rise. So, please rise. So Isang Baksak means one down, one fall, onto the next. And as we conduct Isang Baksak, it's very important to understand its history and its context. So we have to acknowledge the labor movement of the 1960s and the 1970s, where first we will do the unity clap. So that was used during the meetings to end the organizing, the movement, the protests, and so showing that solidarity between Filipino-American, Mexican-American agricultural workers. Now, also part of Isang Baksak is that single clap, where in the 1980s, during the People Power movement, ousting Ferdinand Marcos was behind a series of human rights violations. And so that was also used by the people, the organizers, the families, in order to, relieve them from power. So the unity clap is where everyone will start to clap like the heartbeat of the people. You start from your heart, and it'll go faster, 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 and then we'll end with that single clap, the isang bagsak, because it was thanks to Filipinx organizers, youth organizers here in the early 2000s that brought those two concepts together to represent our solidarity across communities and within the timeline, from the past, the present, and onto the future. So let's all do this together, and then you hear it in Historic Filipinotown, and in celebration of Chris with the Water We Swim In released book. So yeah. And if you feel the need to cheer after in the spirit of self-expression, please feel free to do so. Okay. You want to start at the heart? We'll start slow.